Good morning. Thank you, AJ. It's great to be back here this morning, and I hope you're all ready for day 2 of our virtual D&I Summit. Again, thank you to our Arconic Foundation. So now we're going to hear from some leading executives about how to lead change and embed D&I in your company's culture and how to make it part of the fabric of your organization. So I'm thrilled to be here by this distinguished group, and I will let them introduce themselves and kind of start off the conversation. But really, we're here for an overview of diversity and inclusion issues facing manufacturing and the strategies and the tactics in creating those inclusive workplaces. And so I'm just thrilled, and I'm going to start off by asking Tracy to introduce herself and share with us what D&I means to you and your company to get us started in the discussion.
All right, good morning, Carolyn. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Tracy Haas from Arconic, and I have been with the company about 29 years, although we're in a different split. We've split a couple times, and that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about what diversity and inclusion means to us, because we've had recently, as of April of this year, we had an opportunity to sort of relaunch who we are as a company, building on the values that we had before, and reframing what diversity and inclusion means to us. And so very passionate about this. I've been in HR for about half of my career, maybe a little bit over that. Started in manufacturing, love manufacturing, and have a lot of passion about the diversity inclusion space, and was honored when my manager allowed me to take a bigger role in this space. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Carolyn.
Excellent. So Dawn.
Hi, I'm Dawn Jones. I am the acting CDIO at Intel Corporation. I've actually been at Intel for about 23 years. I started my career as an administrative assistant and kind of worked my way up through the company. I achieved 2 degrees. And I think for Intel, when I think about our D&I journey, we've been focused on D&I for over a decade. We've been disclosing our data in our CSR report. And then in 2015, we made a $300 million bold commitment to full representation by 2020, not only to hold ourselves accountable, but to hold the industry more accountable. We did hit that goal 2 years ahead of schedule, and we'll probably talk about later how, some of the tactics that we use to accomplish that. But I think at our core, we truly believe that diverse and inclusive teams are more creative and innovative, and it is a business imperative for us. It's a force multiplier when we talk about innovation and growth and continuing to grow our culture. And just, I would say personally, I grew up during a time watching the civil rights movement. And I always wondered if, if I was an adult during that time, if I would use my voice for something meaningful and activate. And really working in this space for me is an opportunity for me to drive change. And that is very rewarding for me as a person. So.
Wow, what a story, Dawn, and 2 very, very long careers with one company, which I think is a terrific, discussion. We talk about manufacturing and the change that we're seeing and the change that you're creating. So Stanley, over to you.
Yeah, well, very happy to be here. Stanley Porter, partner at Deloitte. Deloitte, hopefully most people know, we are a consulting, audit, tax, and financial risk advisory firm. We are $40 billion worldwide, in the US plus $20 billion. And in the US, we have over 100,000 people. To say talent matters, diversity matters would be an understatement. Specifically, I started my career in industry with one of the super major oil companies, but have been in consulting and energy and industrials for over the past 30 years. At Deloitte, I serve 3 roles. I serve clients, so can bring a perspective to that, both globally and domestically. I lead our energy, resource, and industrial industry practice, and what that means is we have sectors in power, utilities, and renewables. We have sectors, clients in oil, gas, and chemicals. and then also industrial products, industrial products and construction, where the majority of our manufacturing leadership, talent, clients, and go-to-market efforts are. And so overall diversity, when I think about it for Deloitte, I was trying to figure out how to answer this question. I see our definition evolving and growing. As it pertains to Deloitte specifically, the leader in gender initiatives, and absolutely committed to maintaining that leadership role, particularly in professional services. As I continued my career with Deloitte, we began to look at representation and diversity. Also, we struggled with, like, how do you involve, because we're big on culture, how do you ingrain that into the culture? And then we began to look at inclusion. When you begin to kind of add these pieces together, you begin to aggregate things. And what we've learned kind of now in, I think, this phase of our journey is you have to disaggregate, data. You have to disaggregate the issues of all the groups, that you're trying to deal with. And in this moment, as we deal with, the Black community specifically, where we are today is really this notion of equity. And we've evolved our definition, our focus, our commitment, our resources to really addressing systemic disparities and biases internally and externally. And I'm most excited about that personally, because I believe, for me, it is simply leaving the areas that I impact in a better place. And as a Black professional in what some would call an asset-intensive industry, you do want your clients, you do want your company to reflect America, where it is and where it's going. So I look forward to the conversation. The one angle that I did for Carolyn, that I'm also on the board of Deloitte and also can provide perspective around governance, understanding that we're a private firm, but happy to share that.
Excellent. And so, there's a common thread here, which is leading change. And Stanley, for all of our viewers today, Deloitte has been a tremendous partner to the Institute and leading our work or joining us in the work that led us to our gender initiative, our Step Women's initiative, almost 10 years ago, with the work where we realized, okay, why are women not coming and staying in the sector? And that began the STEP work. And what we've done is now expanded that, right, to many different facets. And so we appreciate your partnership and multiple perspectives you're able to bring. So, one common thread here, as I said, was passion to leading change. And we know that change doesn't happen overnight. And the passion that you all are bringing to your work and then to your companies in this work. So, Dawn, let's start with you. If you could describe either one of your D&I companies, D&I initiatives, or a best practice in implementing the creation of an inclusive workplace, right? So this whole summit is about how people can begin. Where do we start off? So talk a little bit about, Dawn, I know you talked about some of your CSR goals that you've published for a really long time at Intel, but talk about one of the best practices that you guys are implementing that you want to share. Oh, you're on mute.
Do I only get one? Because we have so many. But I'll try to keep it to one. I know we're on a time limit. I think that the key for us is that, D&I is part of our culture. It's how we work. It's not an initiative or a program or a campaign. Although we have all of those in that remit, it really is embedded in our culture. I think one of the key things that we're most proud of is holding ourselves accountable through our transparency with our data. It's a lot of times it's tough. A lot of times the data is not positive. And so to continue to report data, even though we are not required to, we want to continue to push that envelope because we hold ourselves accountable to not only our employees, our customers, our investors. And when we publish that data, it is another level of accountability from an industry perspective where we are able to participate in conversations like this to continue to, push the needle, if you will, on this work. I think one of the things that we are really focused on, especially going forward, I agree with everything, Stanley said about, we have to now be agile and we have to reflect society and what our customers, our customer base and our investors. And one of the things that we think is really important in this work is how we embed this into our systems. So it's not reliant on a person who may be all in, and then that person leaves the workforce and the next person may not be. So what can we do that aligns this work to the systems that we have? And one of those is our inclusive hiring practices, which is modeled off the Rooney Rule in sports, which is ensuring our job recs are posted. We know that a lot of times people get the tap on the shoulder, or someone is hired into a position and we're all looking around like, I didn't see the rec. So we've done some very intentional work around making sure that the job recs are posted, making sure we have a diverse set of candidates available to interview for that job, and as well as a diverse interview panel. So I think for us, we have a lot of initiatives. We have a warm line, which we found out through the Reaching Full Representation or on our journey that we weren't able to assess when employees were interested in leaving until we were doing an exit interview. So we set up a confidential warm line, if you will, for employees to call and get counseling, coaching, talk about their skill sets or whatever that is before they leave, to see if we can do a catch and save, if you will. And we've been able to, we have about an 80% save rate of saving the talent within the company because they have used this kind of confidential service. We are a part of HR, but it is truly a one-on-one kind of coach that will help you if you have a skill set mismatch, or there's issues with your manager, or you just want to grow in a different direction and don't have anyone to talk to. So that's been very successful for us as well.
I've never heard of that before. That's a fascinating practice. And so I'm sure many people are jotting down notes because that's a really interesting take on retention, right? How do you keep them and do that? Dawn, Tracy, what else would you want to bring? How does Arconic look at this and talk about some of the practices you're implementing as well?
Sure, thanks. And I did jot that down, warm line. So I'm going to use that, Dawn, and think about that.
Give me a call.
I mentioned that we're sort of reinvigorating as a new company. So one of our philosophies, and this is a quote from my manager, so a stumble in the right direction is better than a sure-footed silence. So I think that given everything that was going on, given everything that's going on in the community with our company, with COVID, with some other business challenges we wanted to get going and we wanted to get started, but we didn't want to wait till we had it perfect. So one of the items that we did, and like what Dawn said, it's not about a campaign. It's not about one person. We certainly have those too. And the campaign that I wanted to talk about is we launched something called Grow Together. And it was launched by our CEO. So I really appreciate his sponsorship from the very top level. And what it is a way for us to engage in activities, all employees to engage in activity. They could donate to a company that had a social justice type of background. They could volunteer with a company, which difficult during the COVID times, but certainly I think we all serve on, or we can serve on boards and some things like that. Or they could do a learning activity. And what I really liked about the learning activity is that it didn't matter where you were, right? You could be all in, or you could be just really trying to understand and learn a little bit more. And any of those actions counted towards a donation to one of our 6 ERG sponsored groups. And they received a donation, and we targeted 2,000 actions to be done by within a 3-month time frame, and we actually exceeded that within our company. And we've donated $360,000 to in total to 6 different organizations that our employee resource groups selected because it was near and dear to their mission of their organization. So it's been a really great start to our journey. I will say that it's been a great reinvigoration of some good practices that we had. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Carolyn.
Thank you. So, somebody, I think it was Mark Mayberry from Stanley Black & Decker yesterday, who said during one of the orientation discussions, you just have to get started.
Yes.
Just start. And, I think that that's an important theme. One thing that we're trying to tease out, manufacturers, we have some large manufacturers here. We have small manufacturers in our universe, right? We are of all sizes across all sectors and in all parts of the sector. And, you don't have to have the perfect I had a boss that always said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? You don't have to start with the gold standard. You can begin, and beginning is important. And that's what this is about, is how do you begin the effort and then build, because it is an ongoing discussion, and it needs to be, to make sure that we're achieving our goals. So Stanley, you have an interesting perspective. You work with many companies, you've been in industry, you have both your own Deloitte as an employer, plus, the work that you do across the sector. So in your opinion, what unique D&I challenges do manufacturers face that may be different than what other sectors face?
Sure. And so first, thank you for, the recognition, the collaboration we have with the Manufacturing Institute. Paul Wellner and Heather Ashton are leading that for us. And I did want to start there because we, Carolyn, as you know, are working with the Institute on a research diversity, specifically in manufacturing. Now, that research is going to come out next year, but we're seeing, three things that come out specific for manufacturers. One is it's unique, it's different. You have to incorporate the production environment into these plans. Production environment is different than the field, different than corporate. And you have to take that nuance in place in regards to how you're going to look at your objectives. That gets into then, the next two things, which is, the employable workforce. So if you're differentiated in manufacturing, big or small, your workforce you have to look at, particularly now after COVID, but you have to look at your workforce in regards to the employable workforce that might have a local nature versus some dispersion of other industries or professions. And then finally, in the production environment, there is a unique aspect, particularly if it's trade or tech skills, of getting deep into the pipeline, starting in the pipeline, deep in the pipeline, in middle school. Again, back to the local and employable workforce. But these are, I would say, these are trends coming out of the research. But if I step back, the challenge is our current environment. Call it Industry 4.0, call it digitization. We've done the work on skills gap, Caroline. What we're seeing is, if we don't act, we're going to have a bigger issue, because the technology, automation, analytics, these things that are coming into the shop floor, these things that are transforming us in an efficient way, these things that are making us competitive, creates an opportunity to look at your workforce differently, but if not addressed, is going to increase the gap, not only on the skills gap, but on this topic of a competitive workforce that is diverse. So overall, I think for manufacturing, I would focus on the workforce that's different, getting deeper into the pipeline, but being very mindful of leveraging the opportunity of this disruption in technology to bring in new talent that absolutely can be diverse and qualified. So
it all comes back to the skills gap, and to give everybody the point that is, I always talk about the skills gap study that we've done long time now with Deloitte as the landmark work of the study is the landmark study on the skills gap in the sector, but it's also the thing that people know the Institute best for. And, the data point that we use, I think daily, is that it is, by 2028, we'll have 4.6 million jobs that will need to be filled in the sector. And of those, 2.4 million could go unfilled because we don't have the people with the skills. So how does that come back into this discussion of D&I? Well, we need to close the racial inequities and the gaps that we have in our society because it is the right thing to do. It is also the economic imperative for our sector. We need more people, and that workforce of the future is going to look different than the workforce of today. Manufacturing is older, more male, and more white than other sectors, but the workforce of the future, the workforce, in next year is different than the workforce of 5 years ago. And that was why we embedded the long-term goal, in the pledge for action, which I know we talked about a bunch yesterday. Our goal here is 50,000 tangible actions. By 2025, manufacturers would make 50,000 tangible actions, creating 300,000 opportunities, pathways to opportunities for Black people and people of color in the sector. The kicker on this whole thing is how do we track that? In addition to people self-reporting kind of their actions and the opportunities. By 2030, we want the sector to be on parity with the overall U.S. labor force. And we can track that through BLS data. And so, it all comes together because we need all those steps. Well, some entities, Stanley, as you talk about, we need to start in middle school and elementary school, right? That's why things like Manufacturing Day and STEM outreach and STEM career awareness matter. But some sectors, they're focused, more near-term, apprenticeship and internship. We've got to grow the pipeline the same time that we're developing those folks here today. And so all of these things are important, but this is long-term work. Tracy, you've been with Arconic a long time. You guys have changed forms as a company. You've had multiple roles. You mentioned that at the get-go. In your view, what other challenges are top of mind as you look at a dynamic and work environment, a dynamic industry sector, that makes it different on how you approach D&I for Arconic than other sector of the economy?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. And I couldn't agree more with what Stanley said. I unfortunately don't have Arconic doesn't quite have the same recognition that Intel and Deloitte have. So we have to do a little bit more work to even explain what we do sometimes in the manufacturing sector. So I think that's part of the challenge for manufacturing is not everybody knows what it is. Not everybody thinks it's the cool job to have. It's not maybe one of those jobs that you learn about when you're in grade school or in middle school. So couldn't agree more that we have to start earlier on, expose some folks to what manufacturing is about. And I know with the YWCA, which I'm a board member of, we've done activities where we try to introduce young children to how does this, what's gravity about? What is momentum about? And just trying to get people interested in some of the STEM type of activities from early on to help them understand that they can, this is something that they can do in the future and really learn about. So I'm not sure if I answered your question or not, but I think that's some of the challenges, just really making sure people do know that there's really good opportunities out in manufacturing, and then getting to being willing to explore what that opportunity is about at a company that might not have some of the name recognition of some of the big companies that we're talking to.
Well, Arconic's been a tremendous partner for the Institute as well. And so much of what we do, you guys have supported and been part of. And really, when we talk about the skills gap, we got the tip of the spear on closing the skills gap is changing the perception of our sector, right? It is not the dirty, dark, and dangerous. It is, I have young kids and I tell them daily that everything is manufacturing unless you go out and pick the apple off the tree. It's manufactured, right? And so my kids walk around and they're like, that's manufacturing and that's manufacturing, because I have instilled that in them, as my father did with me. And we know that if you're from manufacturing, you're twice as likely to get a job in the sector. But for everybody else, they don't know we're here. Now, Dawn, Intel, you are a manufacturer. You're also a tech company. I love when I talk to students, they say, that that's different. Like tech is a totally different thing. It is not actually of manufacturing, but I always point out, how do you think you get that there, right? I hold up my phone or my device and I say, where does this come from? It is manufactured. So, you mentioned at the onset, and I really wanted to come back to this, your publishing of your data. Right. So how, I think that's probably core to how you measure your effectiveness of your activities, but talk a little bit about that transparency for a minute, please.
Okay, I wanted to comment to Stanley's comment around the manufacturing piece, because especially for companies starting out, I think it's important to understand when we talk about inclusion and you are creating those programs or initiatives under D&I to ensure that you're programming for various shift workers. And so usually the ERG sits in, an 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. But what about those workers that are down in your factories and production plants? Are you creating ERGs or extending that employee resource group so they also feel included into that, overall effort that the company is driving? Number two is don't count out community colleges. I think as we talk about this work and we talk about the changing of the workforce and the workforce of the future, community colleges is a great place to secure talent for some of our manufacturing and tech that we have, especially from an entry-level perspective. So if you are starting out on this journey and you're looking at opportunities that the middle school may not be for you at this time, you're looking to secure talent more immediately, I think community colleges is a great place for you to be able to secure that talent. When we talk about data, we love data. Our premise and our motto when we started down this journey is to look at the data to identify the gaps so we can create solutions. And there's kind of two types of data. When we talk about representation, it really is potentially looking at a group, understanding, what the makeup of that group is. And if you have gaps in, we don't have a female on this team or a person of color, are there solutions where you can create an opportunity? When we talked about posting job requisition, so posting that job requisition and ensuring that you are assessing all of the talent that's available to help fill that gap. The other is a little bit more qualitative, and that's around the employee sensing data. So we know that when it comes to inclusion, it really is grounded in how employees feel about not only the company culture, how they feel about their work, how they feel about different programs and initiatives, and how they feel about society at large. And they're bringing their societal norms and thoughts into the workplace. So ensuring that you have data that does more of an employee sensing, so you can understand where employees are coming from and how they're feeling about, we've had an enormous amount of pressure this year between COVID and the social unrest, and, add something else, so how are employees feeling so you can continue to create solutions that help drive what you're trying to accomplish in this space. And then lastly, to your point, for us, the data, the transparency is difficult. It's difficult for a lot of people, especially when we talk about the needle moving slowly in this space. And, you create bold goals and you try to achieve those goals, and you look at the data and you're not as far as you think you should be, or the industry thinks you should be. But for us, transparency holds us accountable, not only to our employees, to our customers, to our investors, to the industry. And when we publish that data, we are in forums like this where we talk about, you may ask me, Dawn, this is what your data says. And it's not a very comfortable feeling all the time. But I think that the way the world is changing and the way this work is moving, we have to get a little bit more comfortable with being uncomfortable, because our employees are expecting it of us, our customers our investors. And the data is the way that we, and transparency and sharing the data is the way that we, hold ourselves accountable to committing to and doing the things that we set out to do.
So many important points that you just raised. Starting at the top, community colleges, absolutely. I mean, such a tremendous source of talent. We do a ton of work with community colleges. They are core to our upcoming launch of our Creators Wanted campaign, where we're seeking to change the perception of manufacturing. But core partners, people don't realize that is where the grand majority of people get their training. And now we live in a world of lifelong learning. Most people are going to go to community colleges to get that incremental learning to continue to enhance their career. And just so many pieces there. But yeah, let's talk to that. What a year this has been. 2020 is, in some ways, it's the year that wasn't, and in some ways, just massive change and upheaval in a way that we've never, I think, experienced. COVID. Wow, so much to say, the tremendous loss of life. Manufacturing is at the center of combating that, right? From the biopharma to the PPE and all of the things to make us all be able to shelter at home, the importance of toilet paper, all of these massive things that we've talked about that made really manufacturing the center of the discussion this year, at a time of just, terrific economic and social and just upheaval. At the same time, George Floyd's killing back in May shifted. I feel like in some ways the axis of the earth shifted in a way here in the U.S. that I hadn't seen in my lifetime. Dawn, you mentioned earlier growing up during civil rights, movement and seeing that play out. I think for a lot of people, this is the most activity in this space that they've seen, and this outcry for social justice. It certainly accelerated our work in the D&I space, but it's work that we've all been doing for a long time. But now I think companies are all being very deliberate in talking about this in a way and with the deliberate, but also the tangible, right? We have to not just make bold statements. We've all made statements. The statements are important, but what do you do next? And so, considering all of what is going on and this call for social justice and equality, what actions, let's talk about that for a second. What did you see? What actions did your companies take? Is it national? You're setting out a national campaign. Is it very local to your community? Tracy, you talked a little bit about your local activities for employees to engage, but what else are people doing? Are companies doing? How are you leading the way? Stanley, I just heard from Dawn and Tracy, so maybe I'll start off with you if you want to share some thoughts.
Sure. Maybe I'll. This summer was difficult. It was different. And I think it gets to Dawn's point of, you talk about difficult conversations, they finally happened. And so I can get into some specifics, but the first thing that happened that I'm most excited about and proud of is that we listened. As leaders, we got on a bunch of calls and said absolutely nothing. And we listened. And what we heard, we didn't like. But we also heard that there was this thing that we haven't really touched on, is that we have 100,000 employees, and many of them are actually trying to figure out what to do, which informed our path forward. Once you begin to understand the problem, no matter how hard, no matter how ugly, you can't have a path forward. So I'll get to external, but internally, I think by listening in the moment, we're better off. What you also hear when you're listening is that you hear a group of allies, and I think that's the appropriate word. But you hear a group of people who are struggling also to, how do I listen? How do I participate? How do I help? And the most difficult question, Tracy and Dawn has hit it. Dawn has hit it significantly on transparency. What are we trying to solve for? What are we trying to solve for? Particularly leaders. I have no idea why that's so hard for leaders on this topic. But anyway, So number one, in that moment, being in the capacities that I have, both in the market, a leader, and on the board, we began to figure out that we had to disaggregate, get focus, get on a path of transparency and accountability to have a long-term game. So the second thing we did was struggle, pause, to make sure that when we put commitments out, we will be able to live up to those commitments. And I'm very proud of both our CEO and chair, Joe Ugazaga and Janet Foudy, who actually took the time and took this on, because I don't believe you can delegate this topic, Carolyn. I mean, and I know you want some personal stories, but my personal pet peeve is you just can't delegate this. And so we, in the moment, we stood up a Black Action Council that is really focused in now on what are we trying to solve for now that we understand what we've heard, particularly around the Black community. And it gets to a lot of things around accountability, deployment, promotion, pipeline and talent, and also commitments externally to where up to, with matching and all, up to $10 million that we will make into organizations that are around social justice. Finally, we're engaged with our clients. We're a consulting firm, an advisory firm. We help our clients, but we also help our clients and we help our brand. Just to get to the net of this is a competitive issue. If Deloitte does not show up reflecting our clients' diversity and intentions diversity, we lose. So, I mean, I will close also by saying, we are intentionally ensuring that as leaders, we go to market as we want to be perceived and as our clients demand in a diverse way.
So tremendous, so many points there. We talked before we started and said we really want this to be a conversation, and I kind of forgot for a moment that there's an audience out there listening, but I'm glad they are, because there's so much content and value here. So all of you have mentioned CEO, and I do want Dawn and Tracy to talk about your company's actions and what you all have done. But one you've all mentioned CEO leadership. Stanley, I think you made a really great point. You can't delegate this, right? You can't delegate culture, and it's really got to be owned. That is one of the key parts of this panel. So I'd love to hear more about that too. Obviously, we have to have embedded activity among the workforce as well. It can't be just pushed down from the top. You've got to grow it from the bottom at the same time. But the leadership matters and having those conversations. So I just want to underscore that for a moment in case we can come back to it. But Dawn, what else? What specific actions have you all taken in addition to your long history in this space? What else would you like to highlight?
So very similar to Deloitte, we listened, and it was our CEO and CEO staff who held a lot of the listening sessions. We had listening sessions with the African American employees specifically, but then we found just people who are now woke, if you will, and want to do something differently and want to make a change and want to be educated. And Google is a beautiful thing for education. So, one of the things that we kind of continue to encourage people to do is, if you have an interest in something, continue to go and do some research on it so you can help be part of the solution. I think this recent environment over the last year has also given us an opportunity to look at our global employee base, because the U.S. is not the only place that has social equity and social justice issues. And so our social justice and social equity work has taken on more of a global engagement. And what we're looking for, we have a new policy person that is specifically focused on policy around, economic empowerment, growth, social equity, social justice. We've created a team within D&I that specifically focuses on the equity piece. Our Black Leadership Council and our network of Intel African Americans group has done an amazing job creating kind of like the task force that Stanley spoke about, just underscoring maybe some of the issues that they are facing internally. And when we start to look at demographic data and how we solve solutions for each of those, our African American community has some very specific needs that we're focusing on over the next year and a half to ensure that retention, progression, hiring are all solid in that space. And I think, this is unfortunately probably the pace of change that we're going to have to deal with over the next couple of years, and the ability to be flexible and agile and create solutions that may or may not work, fail fast and pivot. I do want to touch on the executive buy-in. It's more than executive buy-in. It has to be executive buy-in, role modeling, and engagement. We've moved beyond just, I agree with this and someone else should go do it. And, our CEO created a very bold statement that he drove saying, we can no longer stand on the sidelines. This is not we have to get in there and do something differently. And I think that, opportunities will continue to crop up, and it is how we handle them, not only as an organization, but as an industry around driving true change is where the sweet spot is, I think, for us.
Great point. And I did see that statement coming out from your CEO, and, that's important. And I think I hope that all of the outpouring in the last several months has actually, I'm actually optimistic, right? That this isn't I did it, now we'll put it on the back burner, but that this is a long-term commitment, and that companies see that this is the moral imperative, long overdue, but also the economic imperative, and that this is a front burner, issue, and it's going to be. And so actually going to that, Tracy, I know you talked a little bit earlier about some of the new work you're doing and the tremendous donation, right, that from employee action, which had to be really fulfilling for all your ERGs. But talk for a minute, going to that long term, can you talk for a minute about some of the trends that you expect to see over the next horizon, 5-10 years out? What do you see? How does this issue play, and how does this work continue into the future?
Yeah, thanks. I think the words agile, flexible, nimble, pivot, all those words are really key in this space. If you look at some of the trends, right, the demographic trends, for example, the Census Bureau says that by 2044, the majority will be the minority, right? There will no longer be a minority or a majority where more than 50% of the population in the U.S. is of one single race or ethnicity. So we talked about the skills gap. We've talked about just the ability to include everyone, right? That's where we have to get to, because if we can't get to that, we're not going to have people to employ, right? Somebody talked yesterday about representation without inclusion is like a bucket with a hole in the bottom, right? You fill it up and it just drains out the bottom because, without inclusion, people don't stay. And I think that's true of no matter what background you come from, right? No matter any of the 6 dimensions, plus a lot of the other diversity dimensions, people won't stay if they don't feel included, if they don't feel respected for what they bring to the party. And it's not about assimilating into a company culture. It's about being appreciated for the differences that you can bring to the company culture and the very skill sets that you add. So I absolutely think we need to be nimble, keep watching, keep being willing to change. I was thinking about this example of the don't ask, don't tell that came up, and some people would have thought, hey, well, that was a move in the right direction, right? At least folks can be in the military, they just can't talk about that, and you can't ask them about it. And at some point, people thought, well, maybe that's a move in the right direction. and then later to have that overturned because it really isn't inclusive, right? You're asking people to hide a certain aspect of who they are and what they're doing. So then later, right, President Obama overturns that, and that's another move in the right direction. So the be willing to pivot and be agile and all of that, I think we're going to have to just really embrace that as I think about the trends that are coming up for us.
So yeah, that's a great, kind of case study, if you will. We're a sector of innovation. We're a sector of creation, right? We are solving problems, whether it is, the daily or the, putting somebody in Mars, right? All of that is part of manufacturing at large, which I think is part of what's so exciting to be part of the sector. So, having people come in with new ideas and different perspectives and different, or like, how are you framing your entire experience, right? And all that you bring to the table, right? That just makes so much sense. And I think I'm excited about the chance that this is the direction that we're all headed. I think you've all hit on the point that inclusion, right? There's two sides of the equation: diversity, almost a counting exercise; inclusion, how do you feel? How does your employees feel? I hear constantly from manufacturers about retention concerns, right? And inclusion is such a key part of that retention. So I know we're getting near time. I'm getting some alerts from the production team here. So, kind of a lightning round. I'll give you a choice. What advice do you have for executives on improving their own diversity and culture of inclusion? Or, how do you lead by example when it comes to diversity? And again, Stanley, I'm gonna start with you on that one. And you can have, it's buyer's choice. Which one of those two do you want to wrap up with?
Okay. Well, first, let me take, because we were going to talk about scale.
Yes.
You can't scale if you're constrained, and I think you're constrained if you don't understand and recognize systemic bias, systemic racism, things that happen in the systems that we create. Not that we create them intentionally to be biased, but if you don't actually look at your performance system, your deployment system, your rating system, and you don't understand how how bias can get into them, you can't scale, right? Which gets into your attrition. So number one, not that people might be biased, but we need to embrace that that systemic racism is there. The last one that I will touch on is the gap. The notion, and anyone ever saying, which annoys me the most, that there's not enough of, is annoying. Because if you believe that, you start with failure. Versus we have an opportunity for many, and then how do we provide that? And kind of then begin to look at, which I keep coming back to, which Tracy closed on, the America, the economy, the clients that will be diverse. I take that position that, there's plenty, but there's plenty of work to do to look like our clients and society and the global economy that would be in front of us. So thank you, Carol.
Thank you. We could do this all day and keep this conversation going, but Dawn.
I read an article yesterday by Barbara Y on LinkedIn, so go check it out. And I think, she had some great points there. The main one for me is be the change. Just take a step, whether it is, if all the step is assessing your data, go in and do that exercise. Or, whatever that step is for you and your company at this time, create an action with a metric and just be the change. There is a personal accountability that happens in this space that you can't put on a company or a group or a team. What is your personal accountability? Make a commitment and do a action to be the change in this space, because it is those incremental actions is what brings about real change.
Fantastic, Dawn. So well said. And I will go look for that LinkedIn. And that's, I mean, Stanley, you said it before, right? Have the conversation. Start, that's, you can just listen. That's what, you don't have to have an elaborate, multi-year, millions of dollars, program. That is important too. And we love that leaders are doing that, but you could just start with the conversation but that's such an important point, Dawn, be the change and start it. So Tracy, last word goes to you.
All right. Thank you. Just couple words, right? Be authentic. That's really important. I've had a number of, I can't count the number of difficult conversations this year. Those are so important. I think they're called crucial conversations, right? So being authentic. And then the second one is really to be open. We all have room to grow in this area, regardless of what it is. And I think we can all be allies and try to get your data from different sources, right? So if you always go to the same source, you're probably gonna learn the same things that maybe you already know. So be authentic, be open, and use a variety of sources.
Well, that is tremendous. And that's what we're seeking to do and to lend to the sector, the network of practitioners to be able to learn from one another. I've learned from all of you. I know I saw some note jotting on the wider screen here behind the scenes. So I think hopefully you've all learned from each other. Thank you so much for the time and the leadership and the passion and the commitment to this important work. We are thrilled to be able to be associated with each of you and each of your companies. And with that, thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, AJ Jorgensen, who's moderating our next panel on building D&I into team and individual goals. I think it's a perfect continuation from this discussion. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.